I never imagined my quiet suburban life could transform into a nightmare so quickly. One minute, I was taking a bleary-eyed sip of lukewarm coffee before my early shift at the hospital. The next, I was standing in my driveway, staring at a bright red HOA violation notice taped right on the steel gate I'd spent months saving up for. The words practically glowed under the morning sun. Unauthorized gated structure, immediate removal required. The jolt of adrenaline hit me like a bucket of ice water. I hadn't even wiped the sleep from my eyes, and here I was, clutching that piece of paper while my heart pounded so loud I could barely think. For 4 peaceful years, my life in this neighborhood had been blissfully boring, right until Karen got elected as president of the Homeowners Association. Suddenly, she was on some power trip, dishing out petty fines and nasty complaint letters to half the community, but demanding I tear down my permitted, city-approved, top-of-the-line security gate. That was a whole new level of crazy. Wondering how this story unfolds? Hang tight because things are about to get insane. Hey everyone! Before we dive deeper into this jaw-dropping HOA saga, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you love seeing HOA tyrants get what's coming to them. Hit that like button and comment below to let us know from which city you're watching. We can't wait to see how far our community spreads around the world, because trust me, this story is far from over. Later that day, with that violation notice still burning a hole in my pocket, I decided to approach Karen directly. In my head, I thought, okay, maybe this was some mix-up in the paperwork. I mean, the city had fully approved my reinforced gate. Why on earth would the HOA care? The second she opened her door, arms crossed and an icy glare on her face, I knew I was in for it. "Oh, it's you," Karen said, letting out a dramatic sigh. I forced a polite smile and held up the violation. "Karen, there seems to be a misunderstanding about my gate. I have all the permits and—" She cut me off with a sharp scoff. "This isn't about permits. It's about our neighborhood's aesthetic integrity." Her lips curled in that haughty little smirk that screamed, "I run this place. Your gate is ugly, and it doesn't fit our community's design. It has to go." I swallowed my frustration. My elderly father lives with me. He uses a walker, and I wanted extra security in case of emergencies. This gate is important for our safety. Karen gave me a smug once-over and shrugged. "Well, then maybe you need a different neighborhood." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just strict, she was unhinged. I glared back, refusing to be bullied. "This gate is staying up, and I don't believe you have the authority to force me to remove it." Karen's face hardened. "We'll see about that." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. Little did I know she'd stop at nothing to get rid of that gate, and me, if possible. That very night, I installed security cameras around my home. Something in my gut told me Karen wasn't finished, and I was right. 2 days later, just after midnight, my phone buzzed with an alert from the cameras. Half asleep, I opened the live feed and nearly choked on my own breath. Karen's SUV was idling at the bottom of my driveway. The headlights glowed like 2 evil eyes in the darkness. I sat straight up in bed. "No, no, no," I muttered. "She wouldn't," but she did. The SUV's engine roared, and the vehicle surged forward, smashing into my reinforced steel gate with a horrific clang. Metal on metal echoed through the silent street. My gate barely budged while Karen's shiny SUV ended up with its front bumper crushed like an accordion. I tore out of bed, heart hammering, and sprinted outside. My dad, woken by the commotion, called out in confusion, but I told him to stay inside. As I reached the driveway, there was Karen, stumbling out of the car, phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, her hair disheveled, eyes blazing. She aimed that glare straight at me. You broke my car!" she shrieked, voice shrill enough to crack glass. I gaped, incredulous. "You just rammed into my property! This is your fault!" Karen jabbed a trembling finger at my gate. "That monstrosity is illegal, and I will have it removed. I was forced to enforce the HOA regulations myself." I let out a laugh that was more of a disbelieving bark. "Karen, you literally drove into a steel gate on private property. That's a crime." Karen's eyes widened, just slightly. Then she turned haughty again, flipping through her phone screen. "Well, I'm calling the police. I'll sue you for damages." "Perfect," I spat back. "Let's see how they respond to the security footage I have of you intentionally crashing into my property." That was when her smug expression finally faltered. She gave a wild yank on my locked gate, shouting about how I had no right to fence her out. The floodlights kicked on, illuminating every bizarre second. When she realized I had the entire encounter on camera, Karen tried to take off in her wrecked SUV. Too late. Sirens cut through the night, and the police arrived to find the scene exactly as I'd described. Watching the officers process the situation was almost surreal. Karen, still in her pajamas, pacing and screaming about HOA rights, while her battered SUV hissed steam onto the asphalt. One cop turned to me with a resigned sigh. "Sir, do you have any footage?" "Absolutely." I pulled out my phone, replaying everything. Karen's face went from fuming red to ghastly pale. The cops wasted no time. "Ma'am," the older officer said, voice calm but firm, "you're under arrest for property damage and trespassing." Karen launched into a shrieking monologue, threatening to sue the entire police department, me and the neighbor's cat for all I knew. But in the end, she was cuffed and led to the squad car, spewing curses over her shoulder. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with!" My heart thumped. She sounded scarily sincere, but I was too relieved to watch her go. Finally, some justice. Or at least I thought so. The morning after Karen's spectacular arrest, I opened my front door expecting some semblance of peace. Instead, I found a fresh new HOA violation notice taped to my steel gate. Due to ongoing disruptions caused by non-compliant structures, all homeowners with gates must submit to an immediate inspection. I felt anger surge through my veins. Karen was in jail last night. How was she still orchestrating this? I marched over to the HOA office, expecting to find some fill-in, but there she was, sitting like a smug queen behind the reception desk, a crisp suit in place of her pajamas. What? I sputtered. Karen offered a victorious smirk. "Miss me?" The HOA secretary, looking deeply uncomfortable, whispered, "Karen was temporarily removed, but the board held an emergency vote. She's back." My jaw dropped. Karen's grin widened as she slid a stack of documents across the desk. "This new policy is entirely valid, Carter. If you fail the inspection, you'll have to remove that ugly gate. Permanently." I wanted to strangle the paper in my hands. "Karen, this is pure harassment." She shrugged, unbothered. "It's called community maintenance. Learn the difference." Clearly, arresting her only fueled her mania. But she had no clue I was about to dig deeper, and soon I'd find her own Achilles heel. The next week dragged on with an uneasy calm, like the hush before a storm. I actually started to think maybe Karen had decided to cool off. That hope evaporated at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed with yet another alert from the security cameras. I opened the feed, fully expecting to see a stray raccoon. Instead, I nearly dropped my phone in disbelief. Karen in the middle of the night on all fours, awkwardly shoveling at the ground under my gate with a spade. I blinked. Is she trying to tunnel into my property? Without hesitation, I threw on some clothes and slipped outside, quietly rounding the corner of my house. The scene was almost cartoonish. Karen's face was streaked with dirt, her immaculate nails caked in mud. She muttered under her breath as she scooped out lumps of soil, flinging them aside with reckless abandon. I hovered near the fence, camera in hand. "Karen, what on earth are you doing?" She shrieked at the sound of my voice and tried to scramble backward, except she'd managed to wedge half her body beneath the gate already and got stuck. A wild panic flashed across her eyes. "Help me out, you monster!" she hissed. "I'm trapped." "You're digging under my gate in the middle of the night. Why would I help you?" "Because I'm going to file assault charges if you don't," she snapped. "I'll say you pinned me under here against my will." Part of me wanted to let her flail around in the dirt until the cops arrived. But sighing, I carefully grabbed her arms and tried to pull her free. That's when she let out a hair-raising scream. "Let go of me, you pervert!" I jolted back like I'd been burned. "Are you kidding me? You literally asked me to pull you out!" She started screeching at the top of her lungs. "He's assaulting me! He's trying to feel me up in the dark!" I stood there, jaw hanging open. The entire scene was absurd. Lucky for me, the security cams were rolling, capturing every second of her meltdown. Eventually, by tugging the gate just enough and pushing from behind, we freed her. She scrambled away, covered in mud and furious. "You'll regret this," she hissed, before limping away as fast as she could, her dignity left behind in the dirt. I'd barely recovered from the tunnel fiasco when Karen attempted yet another outlandish stunt. This time, I was sure I was hallucinating. It was mid-afternoon on a Saturday. I was tidying up my front yard, picking up the debris Karen had left from her last attempt at sabotage. My dad was inside watching a baseball game. Suddenly, I heard a loud thunk against the far side of my gate. Creeping over to investigate, I froze in disbelief. Karen stood on the opposite side, tying a thick rope to one of the sturdy metal posts. "Karen!" I shouted through the bars. "What are you doing now?" She twisted to face me, a crazed glint in her eyes. "I'm getting over this hideous gate once and for all. You can't keep me from checking compliance on the other side." "Are you out of your mind?" I cried, but Karen ignored me. With a determined grunt, she grabbed the rope and started hoisting herself up, feet kicking wildly against the gate. She had about as much grace as a donkey in high heels. Halfway to the top, she slipped. "Ah!" She tumbled headfirst right over the gate, flipping into the thick bushes on my side of the fence. A second later, I heard a thud and a string of shrieks and curses that could wake the dead. I rushed around, found her sprawled in the shrubs, covered in leaves. She scrambled out, face bright red, eyes blazing with fury. "Did you coat these bushes with toxins or something?" she screeched, scratching at the red welts appearing on her arms. "What are these? Poison ivy! You tried to poison me!" I threw my hands up. "Karen, that's not poison ivy. I don't even think that stuff grows here. You're probably just allergic to something in the bush." "Liar!" she spat, tears of rage forming in her eyes. "You planned this. You left these bushes here on purpose to injure me. I'm calling the police for attempted murder." My jaw dropped. "Oh, for the love of... Karen, you can't just call anything attempted murder because you're incompetent with a rope." She pulled out her phone anyway, hands shaking. "You'll pay for this." And believe me, she tried. But by now, local law enforcement knew exactly who Karen was. When they showed up, huffing in annoyance, they took one look at her rope contraption and the brand new welts on her arms, then gave me a sympathetic shrug. "You might want to just cut that rope next time," one officer said under his breath. I could only sigh as Karen stomped away, cursing about antihistamines and lawsuits. For a while, I thought maybe Karen's humiliations would slow her down, but everything she did only stoked her obsession further. She couldn't let go of her mission to eradicate my gate. That's when I realized I needed a bigger plan. She was unstoppable at the HOA level. Even arrests didn't scare her. So I spent hours combing through public records, city zoning laws, building permits, anything to figure out if Karen was the one in violation of some overlooked rule. After all, she'd been living here for over a decade. Sure enough, I hit pay dirt. Karen's backyard fence was illegally extended too close to a protected drainage area. She'd never bothered to file the proper paperwork. For years, her fence had been in direct violation of city code. With a triumphant grin, I fired off an anonymous tip to the building and zoning department. If she wanted to drag the city into my life, she could enjoy the same courtesy. A few days later, the city inspectors rolled in. I watched from my window as they strolled around Karen's backyard, taking measurements and snapping photos. Karen hovered behind them, arms flailing, voice shrill enough to pierce concrete. "This is an outrage! Who complained? I demand to know right now!" They ignored her, professional and calm. I could see Karen's face turn beet red with fury when one inspector handed her a citation. She tried to snatch it away, raving about community leadership, but he just pointed to the fence line. "You're nearly 6 feet over the legal boundary. You have 72 hours to bring it down or face daily fines." That night, I stepped outside to water my lawn just in time to see Karen's meltdown. She was pacing her driveway, clutching that citation. When our eyes met, she marched over, stabbing a finger in my direction. "You did this! You set the city on me!" I gave the most innocent shrug I could manage. "Karen, I'm just following your example. We have to maintain standards, right?" She shook with fury, face twisted. "Don't get cocky. You still have to deal with your own permit issues." But that's where she was wrong. While she'd spent her energy harassing me, I'd sorted out my gate permit fiasco. A minor clerical error had caused it to appear revoked, but I quickly had it reinstated. By the time the city caught up with Karen's illegal fence, my gate was back in good standing. She was stuck with thousands in potential fines and a mandatory fence removal. The next morning, the entire neighborhood watched as workers dismantled her beloved fence while Karen sulked in her yard, glaring daggers at me. With Karen's fence gone, I finally felt a breath of relief. She'd been humiliated, arrested, and faced with a hefty set of fines. The HOA board even voted her out of the presidency again, fed up with her constant dramas. For a few days, our street felt almost normal. Neighbors greeted me with grins and thumbs up. Our local Facebook group overflowed with memes about Karen's wild rope climb and mud tunneling escapades. Most people seemed convinced that the old regime of tyranny was gone. But Karen wasn't the type to bow out gracefully. Behind those suburban curtains, she was plotting something big, her final revenge. And none of us were prepared for just how far she'd go. It was close to midnight when it happened. I dozed off on the couch in front of the TV. My dad was asleep in his room. Suddenly, my phone pinged, an alert from the security camera near the gate. At first, I thought, great, she's probably climbing in a Santa suit or something. But as soon as I glanced at the screen, my stomach turned to ice. Karen stood at my gate, but this time she wasn't digging or climbing or screaming. She was wielding a crowbar. I bolted upright, heart drumming in my ears. Flicking through the camera angles, I saw her jam the metal bar into the hinges of the gate, her face contorted with unhinged fury. She was trying to rip the gate off its frame. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher said when I called. There's a woman attacking my property with a crowbar, I hissed, praying the cops would come fast. Hanging up, I ran outside, adrenaline pumping. Karen, stop! She spun around, eyes bloodshot, hair a tangled mess, crowbar gripped like a weapon. You ruined everything, she screamed. You cost me my fence, my position, my money, my entire life. I could see the madness etched into her features. She was beyond reason. For a split second, I feared she might swing that crowbar right at my head, but in the distance, sirens wailed. Karen's eyes darted wildly. The crowbar fell from her shaking hands as she turned to run. Red and blue lights bathed the street. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop, officers jumping out. Karen didn't stand a chance. Within moments, they had her pinned, cuffing her for the second time. This time, there was a scary calm in her voice. You think you've won, she whispered hoarsely as they walked her to the cruiser. I'll never stop, never. But the cops slammed the door, and for a moment the night felt still. Even if her words lingered in my mind, the madness had ended. Most of us thought that was the final chapter. Karen, taken away after committing outright vandalism. Enough was enough. But apparently, jail didn't agree with her, and she got out on bail within days, only to prove she had one last, desperate stunt up her sleeve. 3 nights later, I was startled awake by a thunderous crunch of metal. My phone vibrated again. Security camera alert. I almost didn't want to look, but curiosity won. The screen showed Karen's figure once more, standing at my gate in the dead of night, the twisted remains of the crowbar in her hand. She's completely lost it, I thought. The gate was still battered from her last attack, but somehow it remained standing. I dashed outside, trembling with anger and fear. Karen, stop! She pivoted, face contorted in a grin that was more like a grimace. You can't keep me out! You can't keep me from the HOA! This is my neighborhood! Then in one swift motion, she took the crowbar to the lock. The unholy screech was deafening. I yelled something, maybe her name, maybe a curse, just as the neighbors' lights flicked on. Sirens. Again. They roared down the street, illuminating everything in red and blue. Karen seemed almost possessed, the crowbar raised. But the cops rushed forward, wrestled it from her hands, and pinned her to the ground. Her screams echoed in the night, but there was nowhere left to run. She's trespassing. She's armed, I said, half in shock. Lock her up before she hurts someone. The officers wasted no time. Karen was stuffed into the back of the squad car for the 3rd time in under a month, now facing felony charges. This time, the judge threw the book at her, given her repeated offenses. No more easy bails, no more wrist slaps. In the weeks that followed Karen's final arrest, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed for good. The HOA replaced her with a sane, reasonable president. Fines stopped rolling in for silly things like grass 2 inches too tall. Suddenly, neighbors chatted happily in the street. Our local Facebook group turned into a source of real community spirit, and people started calling me a neighborhood hero, though I never felt much like one. As for Karen, she ended up selling her house from behind bars. The gossip around town was that she faced serious jail time for vandalism, trespassing, harassment, and violating various court orders. The final rumor said she might move to some distant county, presumably to torment a brand new neighborhood. But as far as our corner of suburbia was concerned, the reign of Karen had collapsed for good. If you found this saga entertaining, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more outrageous HOA stories and beyond. Hit that like button and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It's amazing to see people from all over the world united by a single cause, enjoying the downfall of an unhinged HOA Karen.